To begin with a hearing on House Bill 2217 with a review from Jenna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee members. House Bill 2217 expands the power of the Inspector General to investigate and audit all state cash, food, and health assistance programs. Subsection A has definitions for terms used throughout the bill, including cash assistance, which would include things like TANF, food assistance, which would include things like SNAP or supplemental including things like SNAP, which would be supplemental nutrition assistance to families, as well as health assistance, which would mean the Medicaid program and the state children's health insurance program. Subsection B states that the Inspector General's purpose would be to establish a full-time program of audit, investigation, and performance review to provide increased accountability, integrity, and oversight of the state cash, food, or health assistance programs. Subsection B2 states that a former or current Inspector General shall not be employed as an executive or manager for any program or agency that would be subject to oversight by the Office of the Inspector General for at least 2 years after the Inspector General's period of service has concluded. Subsection G is where the next substantive changes take place, and it provides that the Inspector General and the Inspector General's designees shall have original justification to investigate crimes related to public assistance, the power to issue, serve, or cause to be served subpoenas or other process of service to aid in their investigation, the power to compel subpoena for the testimony and attendance of witnesses directly related to those investigation of those programs, the power to take oaths and administer sworn statements, and to serve and execute search warrants related to investigations. The House committee amended the definition of health assistance to exclude the state employee health benefits program so that this program would not be under the scope of the Inspector General's authority to investigate and audit. This was similar to, well, it's part of the amendments that this committee did last year on Senate Bill 488 when we heard it. And the bill passed the House on a vote of 85 to 37, and it would take effect on July 1, 2025 after publication in the statute book. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Jenna? Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jenna, so I'm not overly familiar with the Inspector General. Mm-hmm. Do they already have authority to execute search warrants?
So if we look on pages 6 and 7, it appears as though the power to execute and serve search warrants is new language. That would be the top of page 7, lines 1 through 3.
Okay, so so this says we're expanding the scope of the Inspector General to audit and investigate all of these other things, but the granting of the power to subpoena, administer oath, and execute search warrants is a new authority, yes. A new police authority, a law enforcement authority, if you will.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay, that gives me a little bit of heartburn. Thank you.
Committee additional questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jenna, so on page 7, just following that part about the search warrants, that section that's blacked out, is it just because it's moved to the, is it changing, is it changing any way, or it's just moved?
Yeah, I noticed that too. It looks like the only difference is that healthcare is made from 2 words to 1 word, but the text appears the same. So that language that's crossed out on page 7, lines 3 through 7 is in your regular typeface, not italics. So that would be original law. And then that subsection 2 is in italics, indicating that it was new to the bill. So I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but that would be current. And I believe what happened last year is that language was stricken and then added back in Senate committee, and we probably just copied and pasted from that bill draft. And so that's probably what happened, is that we just didn't catch that it was stricken and then re-added last year.
And then on page 6, this would be just prior to the piece about the search warrants. So is that line 34, capital A, original jurisdiction to investigate, are those statutes that are referenced there, is that new, or is that just?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senators. So yes, all of the language on page 6, that capital A, B, and D would be new language. So it would be to carry out the duties, then the Inspector General shall have, and it would be the original jurisdiction to investigate certain crimes in those sections. And I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but I know that 39,720 is the large public assistance statute that would have Medicaid, Medicare, and TANF, as well as food assistance in it. And so it would be crimes related to those programs. And then I'll have to double check on what the other statutes are. I believe one of them is like things like fraud related to public assistance.
Thank you. And then just my final question is, on page 4, the section about employment. So that means that if you had been the Inspector General or employed, you couldn't then work for, I'm sorry, maybe is that the right section? Explain that to me.
Yep. So the current language in that paragraph B on page 4, lines 8 and 8 through 11 requires that a former or current executive or manager or any program subject to oversight. So you could think a manager at the Kansas Medicaid program could not be appointed Medicaid Inspector General within 2 years after serving that program. And then the new language is sort of the reverse of that, that if you've been the Medicaid Inspector General, you couldn't then go on to be the state head of TANF or SNAP, for example.
Thank you.
Additional questions, committee? Yes, Senator Owens.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. One more follow-up, again, just making sure that I fully understand criminal procedure. Line 6, or page 6, on line, let's see, 37 and 38, the power to issue, serve, or cause to be served subpoenas or other process of service of aid investigation. Is it standard practice in the criminal court that one single entity has the authority to issue and serve subpoenas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're bringing me back to my criminal procedure days of law school, but I believe it would be more typical that a judge would have to sign off on certain types of subpoenas. Now, there are some subpoenas, like, for instance, just subpoenaing a person to come testify at a deposition where you would not need a judge to sign off on that. But then others, the more criminal type, where you would actually be getting the tangible items, where it would be more common to have a judge have to sign off on that.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask the proponents.
Are there any other questions, committee? Right, seeing none? Because we have a full slate, and I don't think we'll need a lot of time for the proponents, we want to allow time for questions. Each of the one oral opponent and one oral proponent, one oral opponent. We will do 2 minutes each. We'll begin with Stephen Anderson.
Steve Anderson, pleased to be here. 2 minutes to go. So core mission of the IG's office to identify fraud, waste, and abuse and illegal acts in the various programs. The requested revisions to the statute will allow OIG to conduct audits and investigations of CAS and assistance programs. Our goal is to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the program to help ensure those entitled to those benefits are receiving them. We have no intention of removing people rightfully receiving those benefits. Our focus will be on making the system work better for everyone. In my testimony, provide information about the various programs that we look at that include SNAP, TANF, child care assistance, but also the low-income energy program, foster care and adoption programs. These programs are essential to taking care of Kansans who need it the most. However, these programs are often taken advantage of by bad actors. Our goal is to root out fraud, waste, and abuse in these programs as we've done with Medicaid. We've been very successful. Just want to point out that OIG auditors will be conducting in-depth performance audits and reviews. We oftentimes get hung up on the investigation side of this, but we plan to do a lot of audits. Our agents do have the ability to conduct higher level and more complex investigations of contractors, employees, and providers. Another benefit of expanded authority would allow us to do internal investigations of DCF employees. Currently, those investigations are handled by DCF and been criticized as being conflicts of interest. We'd be able to, be able to do independent investigative authority with this to conduct those internal investigations. As OIG exists today, we've been able to identify over $330 million in fraud, waste, abuse, and identified savings. By expanding our authority of this office, we can do even more to protect Kansas taxpayers. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for being here, Stephen. I appreciate the work you do, and I know you guys do a tremendous amount of work. However, I'm a little bit concerned, as you might have heard, about the expansion of authority. Can you speak to how that is currently handled if you don't have that authority now? Okay,
Thank you for the question,
please share
Madam
that.
Chair. I actually do have that authority. It's being restated in the statute, but we've always been able to issue subpoenas. It's not unusual in the OIG community to issue subpoenas for documents and testimony. That is, those subpoenas are reviewed for legal sufficiency. The inquisition subpoena that you sometimes might hear about are issued by judges at the state level, but OIG offices don't have that. Other agencies or offices within the Attorney General's office also have the ability to subpoena documents and records. That is not an unusual thing. Search warrants, we've also always had that ability under the Attorney General, under the law enforcement authority. My special agents are given because we fall under the AG's office, so that's always existed. It's just being stated clearly in here because we didn't feel like it was well stated.
Okay, that answers a lot more questions for me. Thank you, sir.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Steve, for being here. My question is this. We have over 400,000 CAN Care beneficiaries in the state. How many have been identified for individual fraud?
Well, it's, we deal with complaints as far as dealing with that. We've opened over 200 investigations. If I had staff, we could open a lot more. As you know, we've asked for additional staffing on the Medicaid side, which would allow us to do more investigations. Last year, we handled almost 1,500 complaints of eligibility fraud. And I think there's more to be done out there in that regard.
Okay, so I believe it's 7 cases total.
We've opened 7 cases. Now, bear in mind, we just got investigative staff just about a year and a half ago. We haven't always had investigative staff. Up until that point, there was nobody doing eligibility investigations in the entire state of Kansas. So when I got investigators in August of 23, we were able to start doing investigations. I had to hire people. We had to start process. So the wheels of justice are what they are, but we've referred 7 cases for prosecution. We've also identified 36 entities for civil action as well. We anticipate that's going to result in a pretty substantial recovery.
Senator Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do you have any concerns that one of your successors could potentially abuse this expanded authority?
It actually is a problem because my predecessor, Sarah Fertig, was the previous Medicaid Inspector General. She was there for a short time, and then she wanted to become the Medicaid Director for the state of Kansas. That caused some consternation with that happening because she basically knew the entire work plan for the Inspector General's office and took it with her when she went to KDHE. So this is a way to stop that. It's also pretty standard fare that we don't allow contracting officers, for example, go to work for somebody they just issued a multi-million-dollar contract to.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you had identified, I think, in government efficiency, was it $600 million or $400 million in fraud already?
We've identified over $330 million.
Okay,
But one of the things that I testify about is that the pretty standard routine is they look at the amount of fraud that happens in programs like Medicaid on an annual basis is approximately 10%. Considering the Medicaid program is a $5.5 billion program, it's estimated there could be as much as $550 million in fraud occurring on an annual basis in the Medicaid program alone.
Yeah, it's a lot. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Additional questions, committee. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks Thanks for you and Steve, and we have had these conversations before. You, just as was mentioned a moment ago about potential and the reality, 7 cases have been brought forward. There is a hotline that people can call in that doesn't necessarily mean that there is fraud. It just means that if I think my neighbor is doing something, is getting Medicaid and they shouldn't be, then I can call in the hotline. But that doesn't mean there's actually fraud in place at the time. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
So there can be a lot, so you can have a high number of calls, but that doesn't necessarily mean, and that's why it leads to the fact that there are actually just 7 cases that are being moved forward right now.
Well, the number, there's no correlation there. We get a lot of complaints, we vet those complaints, and to your point, we do look at them, and oftentimes we're able to say, no, there's no fraud here, or this person's already removed from Medicaid, so there's no problem. But we look at the ones and the cases that we have worked, again, 2 staff members for doing investigations. We have go through those, we carefully work those, we make sure the evidence supports the allegation, and we refer those for prosecution. If I had 8 more investigators or 10 more investigators, we would have an equal number of cases for each one of those people going forward. I review personally every allegation that comes through our office, and I can tell you we turn down a lot of them because we just simply do not have the resources to pursue those criminal investigations.
Additional questions, committee?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up. On your testimony here, I'm looking at, you talk about the timeliness of SNAP, of the management of SNAP, and I'm trying to understand how that plays into your abilities, if they're expanded through this bill, to oversee the proper use of the SNAP program. So what does that, you talk about timeliness and program integrity are critical to maintaining public confidence. So tell me how that relates to what this bill would put in place.
Are you referring about the testimony I provided for the committee today?
Yeah. Yes, I'm looking at your testimony.
Can you tell me what page you're on? Because I'm not sure where you're reading from.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is in your testimony. It's from the Secretary of Agriculture. It's in your testimony.
I see.
So it's not your words. It's in your testimony.
Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
That's fine. Committee, we need to move on. Thank you so much. And now we will move to the oral opponent. You have 2 minutes. Mark Altenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Committee. Again, my name is Mark Altenburns, and I am the General Counsel for the Department for Children and Families. The Fraud Investigations Unit and Audit Committee or Audit Group that we have falls under the auspices of the General Counsel, which is why I'm here today. We are opponents of the legislation, at least in terms of how it applies to SNAP, TANF, those sorts of benefits. And the primary reason we are opposed to them is because we already investigate them. We already audit those programs, including us auditing them. The federal government audits them. We also do internal checks to make sure that the information is entered correctly and that they're accurate. So in that respect, we're already doing auditing in that respect. In terms of the investigations of potential fraud, we do that as well. All of you have been provided a hard copy of the figures that we have from the past 3 years, I believe it is, from our fraud investigations. Those will be supplemented via PDF. But long story short, we have a team of investigators that does the very thing that the Office of Inspector General is seeking to do by way of this bill.
Mark, I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment, and we won't take that out of your 2 minutes.
Certainly.
The document that you're referring to did not come to committee until about 30 minutes before committee. And so typically we don't pass those out. They could be a part of PDF. But since we are working the bill today, I will allow the assistant to go ahead and pass them out.
Oh, thank you.
Please continue.
terms of our written testimony, you have that in front of you. I'm not going to run through it again. Long story short, in the proponent's testimony, certain claims are made about how this would provide the Inspector General the ability to conduct higher level investigations than DCF can conduct. That's inaccurate. He mentions joint investigations with DCF. Typically how this works is DCF will investigate a fraud complaint. If they find fraud, they will then refer that out to a local district attorney, for example, or the Attorney General, if it's large enough. Typically, unless these fraud numbers hit a certain level, law enforcement doesn't, or the courts or prosecutors don't want to deal with them, but we do refer them out in the same way that would happen if the Inspector General were doing these. He would refer them to the AG or local district attorneys to prosecute. So ultimately, our primary objective is twofold. Number one, it's redundant. It's going to create inefficiencies because of that redundancy, and it's going to cost the state money. The investigations that we conduct are fully paid for by federal dollars because our agency is required to investigate these as the agency that handles these benefits. That's federal statutory law. The second reason is this expansion that the bill would give, that the law would give the Inspector General as to original jurisdiction over these cases. Given that we are the agency that is required to investigate these matters, or at least have an investigative arm, it's unknown, it's uncertain how that original jurisdiction to the OIG is going to work with our obligation to investigate.
Mark, I'm sorry, your
Yes.
2 minutes is up. There
Okay.
will be questions. Committee questions. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, just the point you just brought up, so the fact that you're saying it's unclear as to who would have priority jurisdiction over the investigation?
Correct. The legislation that is proposed contains a provision that would grant the Inspector General what is known as original jurisdiction over fraud investigation claims. What that means is that they get to decide first whether they want to investigate it. And presumably, if they say no, then that would drop to DCF. You typically see original jurisdiction in dealing with what court a case ends up in. So it's a little bit unusual to have it in this context, but it would create a little bit of, I'm not going to use a word like a little bit, it would create some confusion in terms of who investigates alleged fraud, given the original jurisdiction language with the Inspector General and the fact that federal law requires the agency that administers these benefits to have an investigative arm. So we believe this would create confusion and inefficiency and redundancy that is just going to make things harder.
Madam Chair, as a follow-up, so currently, the fraud division that you oversee with DCF, that's paid for with federal dollars?
That's correct.
And so what this legislation would put in place, you don't have to respond to this, would be that we would then have a state arm that's paid with state dollars and doing the job that you're already doing, but also creating confusion as to who has priority.
I think that's a fair statement.
Thank you.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. My question is this. It's my understanding that since 2022, the Office of Inspector General has sent over 70% of the complaints to Clearinghouse and KDHE for additional review. So I guess, I mean, doesn't that in itself suggest redundancy if then they have to go somewhere else for the review?
I can't speak to what happens with Medicaid because I don't know. It's KDHE, it's under their umbrella, so I'm not sure how that all goes together. I'm simply here to address the issues that would affect DCF.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I just think it's kind of one of those things that kind of points to the redundancy, and I fully acknowledge that it's a little different department than yours.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the federal code here, and it said the state plan requirements, the state plan, under the various titles there, Social Security Act must provide, I'll skip down to the A2, which says procedures developed in cooperation with the state's legal authorities for referring to law enforcement officials situations in which there is a valid reason to suspect that fraud has been practiced. The way I read that, you would be cooperating with our legal authorities, which would be, in this case, the Attorney General's office, correct?
We could be. Our job is to investigate, collect facts, and then if we find that fraud took place, we refer that case to a prosecuting body. And that could be the local district attorney, or it could be the Attorney General. We can't prosecute these cases. We're not a criminal agency. So that, I believe that answers your question. There is cooperation with the Attorney General, although most of the cases we send over there, they don't want because they're not, the number's not big enough, if that makes sense. And so we refer them out to both the local district, local county, and also to the Attorney General.
Wouldn't this bill add some teeth to the Attorney General's purview via the Inspector General, though, to give him a little more ability to pursue the fraud?
I don't see how it would, because in essence, the Inspector General, just like the DCF, our investigations, they're not a criminal agency. They can't prosecute these claims. They are investigating them in the same way that DCF does. And then they would refer it presumably over to the Attorney General. I mean, they're under the Attorney General's umbrella, but they're not technically part of the Attorney General. They're an independent body. So in that sense, I view that as largely the same thing. You're just replacing DCF's investigators with the Inspector General's investigators, and whatever findings they come to will be funneled to the Attorney General or some other prosecuting body.
I guess Madam Chair, one more, I'm sorry. I guess I'm wondering if, apparently there's potentially quite a bit of fraud out there, and it would seem that you guys would coordinate with the IG and maybe split up the work a little bit. It just seems maybe not so much redundant as much as another set of eyes to look at the situation. Just a thought, I don't know.
Any other questions, committee? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, I'm looking at your testimony, and you say neither DCF nor its clients would benefit from the proposed legislation. What about taxpayers in identifying additional potential fraud, waste, and abuse? And what about people who are not receiving benefits who legitimately should be, and those who are not making good uses of the resources we have? Wouldn't they benefit potentially from this legislation?
I think that's a good question. And on the surface, I think the answer might be yes. I think when you dig down, the numbers speak to there is not a high percentage of fraud. There is certainly fraud. There's going to be fraud in any government program. But the numbers, there's just not that high of a percentage of fraud. Our view on this is this would actually harm the taxpayer in the sense that it is creating a redundant organization that is paid for, presumably, with state tax dollars, whereas, again, our investigators, our auditors are paid with federal dollars.
If I may follow up, Madam Chair, I'd be willing to take a look, give it a try, and let's see if their work pays for itself in the form of identifying additional fraud, waste, and abuse, and see if the return on investment for those state tax dollars. I'd be willing to take a look at that. But I think that this is absolutely, as Senator Thompson said, another set of eyes. And I guess my point would be, how much fraud is acceptable? I mean, saying that there's just a little bit is not acceptable in my mind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would just say, yeah, I'm sure you've seen the most recent reports that have come out of nationwide, 1.1 trillion that they estimate, and in fraud and Medicaid-related programs. Thank you so much for coming today, and I believe that Senator Clifford has one more question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Briefly,
Anderson.
for Mr. Anderson, if you could come back, there's a little bit of confusion on this original jurisdiction in my mind. I wonder if you might briefly address that. Thank you.
Sure. Original jurisdiction allows our office to work a case. Because typically if a case occurs in the county, you have to approach the county legal authorities to do the investigation. The Attorney General's office has that in a few of their other divisions as well. We don't have to do a mother may I for the county attorney. May we come in and investigate this fraud? That gives us the authority to do that without asking permission of the county. It also allows the Attorney General's attorneys to prosecute the case as well without seeking permission from the county.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, committee, this closes the hearing on House Bill 2217. I would draw your attention to written-only opponents. That's been on there for the last day or two. And now we're ready to move to final action on bills. And we will begin with the bill that we just heard, House Bill 2217. Since this is our last committee that we will be having, and because this has been on the docket now for about I guess since Wednesday, this is a break from my normal routine of hearing a bill, and then we will work it the following day. There is no following day. So we will take final action as has been on our agenda. And committee, what is your pleasure with this bill? All right, Jenna, before we go into discussion, has an answer for a question that was asked.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I looked up those statutes referenced on page 6. This would be subsection G1A in line 34. The original jurisdiction to investigate crimes relating to public assistance, and it's including those found in the ones in Chapter 21, Article 59. That's the Medicaid Fraud Control Act, KSA 39709. It's generally related to fraud or theft in public assistance. And 39720 is essentially assisting someone to obtain benefits via fraud or deception. And then that last statute referenced, I could not find a crime in there, but it's that KSA 75726. It's access to records by the Attorney General. Access to records by the Attorney General. So it just sets out the records that the Attorney General would have access to. So I'm not quite certain what crimes would be related to that. Maybe someone refusing to provide access to those records, but that's the statutes that are referenced.
Thank you. Committee, we're back on the bill. So HB 2217, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we pass House Bill 2217 favorably out of committee.
Do I hear a second? Senator Thompson. Discussion. Senator Petty.
Well, I think we've heard very clearly here, we have in place a investigating body through NDCF, paid for with federal dollars, has the number of inspectors that and more that have been referred to by the with this legislation. And there were points raised here in the testimony that we just listened to concerning conflict of jurisdiction, who has priority. I think we are, with this legislation, we are not improving the investigation of potential fraud. And I say potential fraud because there's this assumption that there always is fraud, and yet we have the information to show that that's, was said, that it's referred back, just as would be in this case, to the local jurisdiction. But if you looked at the testimony that was provided, or the figures that were provided for 25 from the Department of Children and Family, there were 1,800 plus referrals. There were, and of those, 1,169 were non-fraud. then the amount for 3 cases was sent on to investigation. So, so we have something in place. We're not having to pay for it. It's being paid for with federal dollars. We're now wanting to use, as we say, we want to look at being efficient and making the best use of state dollars. We are putting in place something that's not making the best use of state dollars and being redundant. So I find this piece of legislation, House Bill 2217, totally unnecessary.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, just the fact that the one office is being paid for by federal dollars and the other is by state dollars, the federal dollars, they're beholden to the federal government. State offices beholden to the state. I think we need this second set of eyes to do their job. And the fact that the federal government is approaching $37 trillion in debt and there are going to be cuts, how much can we rely on the federal dollars to continue to flow into these efforts? We can control the state dollars. We can't control the federal dollars necessarily, and so I support this bill. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I have concerns in the respect that identified potential fraud is much different than actual fraud and recovery. So we have, as pointed out, 7 cases out of over 400,000 beneficiaries. That is a very, very minute amount in terms of actual cases. So again, then it does suggest that this is redundant and that the ROI isn't there, the return on investment, because again, that's a very minute term or very minute number when you look at overall. Plus the fact that we do have a branch already doing the investigating, and some of these cases from the Inspector General end up going back to there for review. So it does feel redundant, and again, another $1 million is what's being asked for to double up on this. I will not be supporting.
And committee, I would draw your attention to the fact that this bill is not just regarding TANF or SNAP. It's overall Medicaid fraud, and that would include providers who are turning in fraudulent cases. And the additional monies is to hire more staff to be able to investigate those as well. Any other discussion? If not, we will vote. Committee, we've had a motion, we've had a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. And the bill has passed out of committee. Committee, now I would draw your attention to final action on House Bill 2039. Jenna, would you give us a quick review?
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2039 amends definitions in Chapter 39, Article 20. I'm providing that if you are a certain entity that provides only physical therapy, occupational therapy, or speech-language pathology services, only that you are not a home health agency.
Committee, I would have a conceptual amendment on this to add it to the register. This, as you know, when we have several bills that are of the same, in other words, this would be a provider bill. We have others that we could combine in conference committee. This would be one of those, so a conceptual amendment to move this to the register.
I'll second the conceptual amendment.
Right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are back on the bill, and Senator Clifford.
Madam Chair, I move to pass out House Bill 2039 as amended favorably.
Do I hear a second? Senator Rose? All in favor, or any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That bill has been passed out as amended, and now we're moving to House Bill 2311. Jenna?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill relates to children in need of care and foster care families or adoptive families, and it would prohibit the Secretary of DCF from requiring potential placements for custody or adoption to either sign a policy or adhere to a policy that could conflict with those potential parents or custodians' sincerely held religious beliefs, and also creates a civil cause of action against the department for alleged violations of the policy prohibiting the adoption and enforcement of such requirements.
Do I hear a motion on this bill? Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee pass out House Bill 2311 favorably.
And Senator, my apologies, this also could go on the register, and so that's a conceptual amendment. Let's start there. Is that okay? So with that conceptual amendment, do I hear a motion on that?
That's what I meant, sorry.
That's what you meant, Senator Thomas, of course.
Second, Madam Chair.
A second one from Senator Clifford. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, now we are back on the bill. Senator Thomas.
You sure you want me to take another crack at this one? Okay, all right.
Yes, with my
Madam-
apologies.
Madam Chair, I move we pass out House Bill 2311 favorably as amended.
Second, Senator Rose, on discussion. Yes, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, there were several concerns brought up during the hearing in regard to this bill and the impact to the system and getting children placed in environments that are positive for them. So in light of that, I will not be supporting. Thank you.
Additional discussion? Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will support this because I think the attack on people of faith needs to stop, and I think this is a good bill. Thank you.
Right, we have a motion, we have a second, and now we will vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Committee, this is passed out of the committee, and now we are on our final action on House Bill 2335. Jenna, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2335 amends KSA 403401 to amend the definition of healthcare provider related to the Healthcare Stabilization Fund, and it would add maternity homes that are not owned by a physician or other healthcare provider to that definition of healthcare provider in the Healthcare Provider Insurance Availability Act.
Would you remind us the vote on the House side on this? I believe it was unanimous. 123-0. Thank you. Committee, what is your, do I hear a motion on this bill?
Pass this bill out favorably for passage. I'll make a motion to pass this bill out favorably.
It has been moved, however, I do have an amendment, Senator Petty, that we could put this on the register, and would you amend your motion?
Absolutely.
Second.
Senator Clifford seconds. All in favor of putting this bill on the, or making the effective date as the register, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Senator Petty, do you have a motion on this bill as amended?
Yes, Madam Chair, I recommend that we pass House Bill 2335 as amended favorably for passage.
Second? Senator Holscher? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This bill has passed out of committee. Committee, thank you so much for all of your hard work this session, and I especially want to thank our staff who talk about hard work, who work on our amendments and put all of this together. Let's give them a hand. Thank you so much. In committee, for the last time this session, we are adjourned.